Good evening, everybody. Now, as you said, I am a world traveler. I've been traveling the world since 3 months after my birth. So my whole life, I've been seeing people and cultures, and I've been fascinated by both. And now, in my present avatar, I'm very involved with stories. Storytelling, story workshops, business story workshops, my events, and also interacting with storytellers across the world. So the talk I'm going to give you today is a condensed and simplified version of an online talk of mine, which was titled Culture Through the Lens of Stories. Now, all of you know that with this shrinking world, a big buzzword or buzz phrase is intercultural understanding or intercultural training. And that's necessary as more and more people from different cultures and countries work together. So we learn about mannerisms, we learn about customs, we learn when to shake hands or when to say namaste, or we learn about individualistic societies and collective societies. But somehow, when it comes to the time of working together, we don't always seem to be on the same page. I know my German friends ask me, Kumar, why is it when we ring up India and we ask them, hey, are you going to meet the deadline? They say yes, but they don't meet the deadline finally. My Indian friends ask me, why is it that the Germans don't understand nuances? And that's where I say, we've been training a lot of exterior aspects. But what about the internal aspect? What about the psyche of the people? Now, it is known that cultures through the centuries have used stories to pass on their values, their beliefs, their customs, their rituals to the next generation. So that not only do they live, but their cultures live. In fact, and here let me quote directly, Plato said, "Then it seems that our first business is to supervise the production of stories and choose only those we find suitable and reject the rest. We shall persuade mothers and nurses to tell our chosen stories to their children, and by means of this, mold their minds and characters, which are more important than their bodies." Mold their minds and characters. The creation of stories, first business. So having heard that, it sounds logical that if you want to understand the mind and character of a people, we should look at the stories they share within themselves and they share throughout the generations. So when I started my first experiment many years ago, the first thing I asked myself was which story? And I chose a German story. I come from India, why choose an Indian story? And I chose a story nearly all of you would know, Frau Holle. There's a very unique aspect about the story Frau Holle. Frau Holle is a story very well known in the German-speaking countries, but less known or nearly not even known in countries outside the German-speaking world. So it became an excellent story for me to study. Let me just sum it up. A mother, no husband, no father, with 2 daughters, a stepdaughter, beautiful and hardworking, a biological daughter, ugly and lazy. The stepdaughter works very hard, spinning whole day, every day. One day she drops the spindle into the well. Frightened of her stepmother, she jumps into the well to find it, and she lands up in a meadow. There she sees an oven with burning bread. She sees an apple tree with apples just hanging down. She comes to a little house with an old woman. She helps them all. They like her a lot, but one day she becomes homesick, and she wants to go back. So the old lady takes her to a door which joins the 2 worlds. And as she opens the door and she passes through, a shower of gold comes down on her. Her stepmother is jealous. wants her own biological daughter to have the same experiences. So the story is repeated. Spindle down the well, jump into the well, meadow, oven, tree, house, old woman. But this time the girl does not help. And they don't like her. So they say, why don't you go back? And there she stands in front of that door, happy because now she's going to get that shower of gold. And as the door opens and she walks through, a kettle turns over and tar falls onto her, which sticks onto her for life. Excellent story. I loved the story when I first came across it. But then my mind went to what are the layers of this story? Layer number one, work hard, be nice. You'll be rewarded by gold, a material reward. If you're lazy, you're going to be punished. Excellent message to give to children. Next level, it's a girl. We're talking about baking. We're talking about apple orchard. We're talking about doing housework. What message is going out there? A third level, which was very interesting for me, was why didn't the girl go to the woman and say, who are you? Why should I listen to you? Why should I clean the house, and what is this reward you talk about? But she doesn't. I asked my German friends, and they said, yeah, it's okay, no problem. But I said, no, for me it's a problem. She should ask. She should be amazed that why does this world change? Why am I in a meadow after I drop into a well? So I go back into my data bank of stories that I've heard when I was young. And I come across a story from the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is an Indian epic, a mythological epic, with Lord Krishna and everything. And this story is about the 5 Pandavas, their kings, who have been sent into exile. And they're in a forest with their mother. Now they're very thirsty. So one brother after another goes out looking for water, and none comes back. So finally Yudhishthir, the oldest brother, goes out himself. He's the last now. And he comes across this big lake. And there he sees his 4 brothers lying down, seemingly dead. And he says, I have to do something. But before that, let me quench my thirst. And he bends down to drink the water. There's a voice which comes, stop! Drink that water and you shall die. Yudhishthira turned around and said, who are you? And he said, I'm Yama, the god of death, and that lake belongs to me. Drink it, drink water and you'll die, or answer 3 questions and I'll let you live. So back and forth starts. Indian. So he starts bargaining. And he says, you bring my brothers back to life, then let's talk. So finally Yama agrees, Yudhishthira answers the questions, everybody's happy and they go home. So that said, okay, that's the Indian mentality. You have to establish your authority. Your authority is not a degree. Your authority is your knowledge. What authority do you have to give me that instruction? That question came in immediately as an Indian. Whereas that young girl did not question. So you notice slight differences coming up there. Very simple, but slight differences coming up there. So like this, you'll find stories across the world. Interestingly, you'll find nearly every story in every culture, or variations of it. But some stories, some cultures pick up some stories, other cultures pick up other stories, which they propagate and they pass on. So it becomes interesting to understand what those stories are. Let's take a small example. 17th century Italy. A very short story is created over there. 60 years later, this story is imported into France. 100 years after that, that story is imported into Germany. In France, the story becomes Cinderella. In Germany, the story becomes Aschenputtel. There are subtle differences between that story. Understanding those subtle differences helps us understand the psyche of the different people. So I won't go into that, but that's the process of starting to understand cultures and people. So what I've done today is very simplified it for you. It's a much broader, it's a much complex concept. But I've simplified it to say that in the future, maybe what we can do as people is to look, to reach out, not only when we learn do the intercultural training, but to share stories, to ask for stories. What are the stories you heard as a child? What are the stories you've lived through? What are the stories I have heard as a child? What are the stories I've lived through? And as we go deeper into these stories and try to understand them, we understand each other more and better. So hopefully, slowly, we start coming to the same page. For we know how your psyche, you know my psyche. And hopefully, we have a different kind of world. Thank you very much.